here, just let me know. Just a quick introduction.
I need you to stay in the light.
Yeah, sure.
Because you're a light worker.
Right?
Yeah.
I've met some of you guys, I haven't met everybody. I've been involved in some legal matters for almost 7 years now. I just by way of a little bit of background about how I came to be here. I was just having a coffee next door, and I just saw a sign on the door. Darryl was doing a presentation. He looked like he had a few years on him, a little bit of grey hair, glasses. I thought, oh, maybe he knows something. I might be able to learn something. So that's how I ended up in the mix here, and I do a bit of yoga with George as well. Just a little bit of background about me, very briefly. I don't know whether there's a flyer going out. I've had quite a bit of experience in financial services, as many of you know, running a private bank owned by ANZ, looking after some of the most prominent people in Australia, including politicians, some of the top lawyers at Minter Ellison, Partners, Freehills, it's called Tier 1 law firms, were all my clients. I guess I've been fortunate to learn through private conversation some things about the nature of the legal system. I certainly don't claim to know everything. I really enjoyed Darren's presentation a couple of weeks ago. He's got some gold, and I know it, and hopefully he knows it, and I don't know whether everyone picked it up. We're also dealing with things of an esoteric nature. And if you think that lawyers, particularly at the pointy end of everywhere, don't know that, you'd be sadly mistaken. All right? And it's not something that one can just communicate very easily. George does a reasonable job of touching on these subjects. And I had dropped this on a few people just to see what their reaction is, and a lot of people just don't get it. But the law is no different, particularly at the pointy end, to any other esoteric subject you may wish to talk about. I know in this room there's a lot of people looking into a lot of things. So what I want to do tonight is try and cut to the chase about what I want to say. And what tonight's supposed to be about is, number one, understanding the game. Simple line, very big subject. Number two, I think it was private settlement agreements, as distinct from just settlement agreements. And the third point was, I can't remember. Does anyone remember what the third point was? Those two are the most important. Anyway, what I've done is just 3 dot points. I don't prepare much for presentations. It's not how I roll. Just do it off the top of my head. I don't feel the need to do that. I'm not looking, with respect to how we run this. What's the time now, George? It's about 8:15, is it?
10.
All right, so it'll go pretty quickly. And then I know there's a lot of people in the room that want to talk about a lot of other things. This is a pretty big subject. We've got so much noise in people's minds about such a broad array of subjects, and we also have a lot of opinion. A lot of this opinion's coming off internet, which are other people's thoughts, and we have this sort of concept of resonance, and different people resonate with different information. And that's a very, very personal journey, and that relates to what's going on in your personal inner world. Does everyone know where I'm coming from? Yep. So basically what we're saying, and this is part of the content I'm going to get into in a minute, is that it's all subjective. All right? And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge this. It is all subjective, and that's the game. It doesn't matter what judge anywhere in the world. I'm sort of dabbling with the High Court at the moment. They may think they're objective, but they're not. They're subjective. They're human beings. And once you understand that you're just dealing with human beings, they can wreck your life, don't worry about that. But there's really nothing to be frightened of, number one. And number two, you have to play the game in the right way. So I've just got a couple of little notes here, and I just want to say a couple of things, because there's people in all sorts of different situations. There's some people in the system, and if I had met them as in they're in court, and some people have actually initiated that process, which if I'd met them before, I don't do that. You don't need to do it. Everything can be settled outside court. And just on how difficult it is, particularly if you're self-represented, I've got 3 law firms at me. There's other players, the ATO. These are all settled now. Those 3 law firms have been, dealt with. There's the ATO, there's a financial institution. And what people do when they've got something to lose, and this is whether you're at an individual level or a macro level, is if they've got something to lose, which is a subjective thing to say, but that's what it is. There's a fear of loss, and when there's a fear of loss, and if you're feeling that I have something to lose, you're in real trouble.
Yep.
You're in real trouble. So this is all about fear and threat. Right? That's the game, and that's the game that lawyers play. It's the game that judges play. It's the game that pretty much everyone else plays, but we're talking about legal matters at the moment. So, an example of how difficult it can be. I've got had a partner of 2 partners of a fairly significant law firm, 120 staff, been around for 40 years. This guy's got years on me. He's been a barrister, he's been a solicitor, and he's been in the game for 40 years. He knows how to play. He tried to self-represent against me. He shouldn't have done that. It was a big mistake, but he had a lot to hide. And I'm not saying, this is not my ego, I'm saying he made a mistake. Right? I'm no legal genius, trust me. I was playing a different game. He struggled and he lost 3 times. Right? So he lost the first time, and then there was an appeal, and then he had a 3rd crack. Right? But I didn't actually win. He lost. Does that make sense to everyone?
He undid himself.
He brought himself undone. The reason was he had a great deal to hide. Some of you know what it's about. I'm not going to mention it while on the film. And if that had come out publicly, he's finished, and he's looking in terms of his business operations, and he could have ended up in jail. That's what was at stake for him. So you can understand that he had a fair bit of fear going on. Is that a fair comment?
Oh, yeah.
Now there's 2 others, and it's the same game going on, and I won't go into those details. So if you're self-represented and you're stepping into a court situation, you have to be really, really conscious, and some people have done it naively, and that's fine. I did it many years ago, where you've got this thing about justice, and you're so adamant about the fact that something's wrong, and I've done it, right? It was on minor issues, but that's how I learnt. And you get all caught up in this thing, and you realise that justice has got nothing to do with anything, right? And neither is the truth. And I've heard some people say that the truth and be truthful. That's not the game. The legal game's got nothing to do with your truth. It's got nothing to do with that truth, right? Whatever you may believe that is. It's a game, and that game is about argument, right? And that game is about your argument being more compelling in the eyes of the adjudicator, which is a judge, also called an administrator of justice, a judicial officer. They're all interchangeable, and that's what's going on. And he's subjective as well. So another point I want to make on this is that these guys, it is a game, and the good guys, the guys at the pointy end, they know all the judges. Has anyone heard of a book title called Reading the Bench? Or they have an idea of what that means? Anyone heard of that?
In a broader sense, yeah.
Right. The solicitors, there's a bit of a crossover because some small guys are a solicitor and a barrister, but the general way it works is a solicitor generates the business, or you might approach them. They're just a business development person. They do know a bit about the law, and then they select a barrister, and the barrister is the guy that's in court doing the arguing, right? And that's their specialty. They like arguing, right? Darren would probably be a pretty good barrister. Sorry I'm digging on you a bit, mate, but he'd probably do a good job, in my opinion. They work with the judges every single day, and the biggest part of their job is to understand the psyche of the judge, and that's called reading the bench. Right, now this is all publicly available information, and you shouldn't need to hear any more than that to know that it's a game. It's got nothing to do with justice, or nothing to do with it. So in my situation, I'm watching these guys and I'm up against some pretty serious heavy, I call them heavy hitters. These guys are, I'm not going to name them on film, but I'm happy to tell you who they are. They get paid a lot of money because they're highly skilled at manipulating judges and making arguments. They spend most of their days looking at case law, being very familiar with case law, but once they've sort of got their game worked out, it's just a cookie cutter approach. They just do the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? And they're trying, and outside court, here's another point. I was told that, and it's 3 firms working in together, which is not supposed to happen, that they were going to destroy me, and they kept telling me that, and threat. And I've heard some mistakes being made here too with people. What goes on outside of court, what someone says at an AGM, that's another one I've heard, with respect to the Telstra CEO, has got no relevance in a court of law. You can say whatever you like outside. All right? And some people might want to dispute this, but I'm going to say that you're very wrong. It's only what happens inside the court, once the judge has entered, or rise, all that stuff. The court's now in session, and then it ends when the judge, takes their hand or whatever the particular proceeding is about, and they leave. And one of the biggest mistakes people make when they first come into this is they take recordings, could be of a police officer, could be of anyone, or something at an AGM, and they want to go into court and say, see what he said, it doesn't matter. It's absolutely, utterly irrelevant. So you get caught up, and I'm sure you've heard this term, in a he said situation, a he said, she said, or a she said. And all that happens then is you go into court, you're behaving like that, you're getting caught in their gun, and you hear the sound of the cash register just clinking away. Right? So what I do, and have done and did in this case, is I actually tried to settle with all 3 law firms from the outset. There's different parties involved, and I'm going to stay out of the detail. Given the stakes, and as I said before, because they are all in a position of fear, and they had a big lot to lose, they just couldn't do it. And unfortunately, it's not. And I tried all the way through, actually. Now, when I say settle, it doesn't mean that I didn't have some conditions, given what was going on in those particular. It's a pretty big issue, and so I had some conditions, but they weren't unreasonable. And because I know how to play the game, part of those conditions were that this wouldn't go public. Does that make any sense? And if you think about your own personal life, you've got things going on in your inner world that you want to keep private. Is that not true? And you don't want to disclose, it's not hard, this stuff. You'll be very careful about judging what's going on in your external world or how you approach it. Because everyone in this room has got things they may not want other people to know about. It could be things from your childhood, it could be guilt and shame and all sorts of things that you might be carrying that have got, really you shouldn't be, because this is the problem, this is part of the game as well. And we all do this, we've all got maybe a wounded child somewhere. Would everyone agree with me? All right. And that's part of the game as well, because if you put enough pressure on a person and people's fear of court, this is the effect it has on people, that shit all comes to the surface, right? You start feeling it, right? And if the pressure's strong enough, and you're on your own, you're trying to self-represent, and this is what brought undone these guys, as I previously mentioned, you start coming apart at the seams. And that's in a court setting, and that's exactly what happened. Now, in my case, I do have issues. Everyone does. You're not in this world without some fear and stuff going on. But I'm just going to say I've done a fair bit of work on myself, right? Which I started very young, because I became conscious at a young age, for personal reasons, that this inner world's important, and if you've got stuff going on in your inner world, if you can get rid of it as fast as you can, and you're at peace within yourself, which I'm not claiming I am, by the way, you're less likely, one, you're likely to have a much happier life, I think, and number 2, you just don't feel as sort of threatened by what's going on around you and other people's opinions, for example, because everyone's going to project their shit onto you. It's just the human condition. You can't do anything about it. He's laughing. It's just true. right? We've all had relationship breakdowns, we've all got kids, you know, I mean, that's a huge challenge, you know. You know, like, you never know what you're going to get, do you? Is that a fair comment? I'm just picking on you because you told me you're a mum.
Yeah, I've got four adults.
Yeah, that's a fair journey.
Yeah.
And in my world, the most valuable people that I've ever met have been people sweeping the streets, maybe a mum with 4 autistic kids, and there's a lot more of that around. That I don't want to steer into that stuff, pharmaceutical, you know, all that stuff. There's a lot more of that around than people may be aware. And these people are absolute heroes. Some women I'm talking about, single mums often. You know, it's that. And there was a guy here that stood up at Darren's presentation. You know, it's just, I think Darren might have been giving him a bit of a hand, I'm not sure. Who's been fighting for 3 of his kids. I don't see, and he's one. He's clearly a good man. And to me, that's the stuff that really matters. Right? And that's about, you know, what you're prepared to fight for, and things like children and your love for the children. And I hate to think what was on the other side of his little journey there, but there's some pretty nasty people out there. Would everyone agree with me?
Oh, yeah.
Vicious. They don't seem to have any self-awareness, and they don't have the courage to look into themselves. Right? I'm at a higher level, I've got no issue with this, but I'm not going into the esoteric, because those people are also our teachers. Who would agree with me on that?
Yep.
Right, so you're all pretty aware in this room. Now, what else have I got to say along there? Just a couple of, you know, I don't want to get into the procedural technical stuff. Some of the things I'm going to say next might, you know, I don't know, we'll see how we go. Darren's outstanding with, he spent, is it 10 years, Darren, that you've been looking into statutes and...
Well, no, somewhere in between about 9 and 10 years.
Yeah, well, I've got about 3 years experience there. It's not my game. That's not the game I play, and I know Darren's really, really good in that space. Daryl, I think some of you guys have been along to that. Has anyone done Daryl's the course, or was that years ago or something? Know Your Rights or something like that?
Sorry?
Course, no?
What was that?
Daryl was running a course called Know Your Rights.
Oh, no, he talks on the radio show.
Does he?
Yeah.
Who was doing the Know Your Right? Was anyone doing that?
There's Mike.
Oh,
Mike
okay.
and Daryl.
Anyone done that, or no?
Yeah. It was on just this last weekend.
Oh, was it? Okay. So Daryl's got a slightly different perspective than I have, and Darren has, and in fact everyone else has, right? I'm not a technical person. I don't want to get into all these statutes, and there's a reason for that. I mean, I have, don't get me wrong, I've had to play that game to a certain extent. I was in 6 jurisdictions in 2017 in playing this game. But the real thing that I want to say is that the judges have a very broad thing called judicial discretion. Has anyone heard that term?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what that means is they don't have to comply with these statutes. They don't have to. That's not the game that they play. What they have to do is justify their orders or determinations using, you know, they're constrained to some degree by what we call authorities, also referred to as precedent, and that means, you know, Darren would probably articulate this better than I would, but that's about old case law and previous decisions that have been made by judges going back, you know, you can go back, you know, hundreds of years if you really want to and play that game. The judges don't have to comply with that. All they have to do is justify their decision. Now, part of this game is, and I'll give you another example from my recent experience, is that the authorities, there's authorities, and a judge might, you know, there's some that are very common and they'll hang on depending on the jurisdiction you're in, but there's always another flip side to that coin. You can go and find some other authorities that sort of would appear to be, you know, not agreeing with that judge's authorities, and we're now in an appellate jurisdiction, we're now doing a he said, she said, or he said with a judge. Right? It's the same game at a fundamental level. And that's the nature of the game. Everything is arguable. Everything. And you can use authorities to make argument, and one of the issues that Daryl's been talking about, of course, in very simple terms, is are we a constitutional monarchy in Australia? and I've used the term, and I've heard someone else use it, or a pseudo-republic. Right? Now that hasn't been important to me in my past. I was sort of aware of this. That argument's been going on for about 30 years, and it's been in the public domain before. I'm a little apolitical, but I've learnt a lot from Daryl and Darren about this, and now I'm sort of like, oh well, maybe it is an issue. I'm not sure yet. But that question would be, do we have more rights under a constitutional monarchy than we do under a pseudo-republic, which is what we appear to be living in at the moment? And I don't know the answer to that, because I'm not really a monarchist. I don't like them either. So I don't really want to engage in that. But if someone could convince me that we are better off, or there was some reason why that's worth arguing for, and this is something I'm contemplating at the moment, and I might want to avail myself of a few other people's assistance here. I've been thinking about getting that question into the High Court of Australia, and according to Daryl, that hasn't been done. And I haven't checked all the applications yet, because a lot of it, or a very large proportion of applications to the High Court are just dismissed. And I'm sure Darren knows a bit about this, in fact I know he does. Asking the questions is pretty easy, but you've got to get this thing in front of the judges, you know, whether it's in the UK, whatever, High Court in the UK, or whether it's the High Court of Australia. That's the bigger challenge, right? And that's a real tricky game, and I'm not going to say too much about that tonight, but it's a lot more difficult, because they just say, no, piss off, we don't want to answer that question. Right? That's essentially what they're doing. So how to get it in front of them is another thing.
So through the registry to start with.
Well, you've got to get, yeah, it's the whole application process. If they really don't want to deal with that issue, and they put up an enormous amount of resistance, and that's fine, that's part of the game. You've got to be pretty clever about how you wheedle that in. And you might have another issue, which I have, and this is what I've been thinking about, where I may be able to get it in, and I've done this already a few times, because I've been successful in getting stuff into an appellate jurisdiction. Clunky as I may be, I have actually done it. I'm learning, of course, as well. And that's sort of, it's a real tricky game. So, anyway, I don't know if, hopefully that makes sense. I'm just saying that it doesn't, even the authorities and precedent can be just thrown out the door. You go to the fence, as a barrister, this has happened to me, where there was an 18-month period with one of the matters where we go through directions hearing after directions hearing after mention after this, and the solicitor, who was representing the party in all substantive matters, which is a legal term, which means most of the issues, kept wheeling in barrister after barrister after barrister. I'm in there just looking at the registrar going, you know, because I know it's a game. She knows it. She knew what was going on. I call them kids. They were probably 45, 50 years old, but their level of awareness of even their own game, and this is something you need to remember, there's some really shit lawyers out there. Really shit lawyers. And barristers, just like any other industry. There was not much, I don't want to go into the details, not much I could do about it. What I was doing outside of that process is by way of correspondence between the parties, right? That's the game that's played between, you know, their law firm and your law firm, which in my case was me. I'm trying to settle it through that process. That's also how the discovery process is done, as you're probably aware. That's a little game that's played between the two law firms, right? What goes on in court is a different game. That's where we bring in legal argument, statute, you know, all that sort of stuff, trying to get our own way, basically. Now, sometimes you just can't do anything about it, right? They're off. They're going in there. This solicitor was full of fear, again, massive fear, and she's trying to hide behind male barristers, right? So there's a little bit of male-female stuff going on in there, and it just rolled on, 10 grand a day, ka-ching, 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 I can't do anything about it, just got to let it run. Does that make sense to them? That's just how it happens. If you can't get through the other side or get them into a situation where they're prepared to come to the table and try and resolve an issue, it's just life, isn't it? We've probably all had that, you know, in your personal world on some level. there's not much you can do about it. You just got to accept it. And a big part of this game is not to get caught up in it, all right? Because they're trying to suck you in, and your little emotions are going off, you know, because they are, you know. And the game is, yeah, righto, I'm really feeling this, and you know, it's a very personal thing too. You've got to do it in your own personal world. I'm just not going to allow myself to get caught up in this game.
Yep.
And you've just got to sit there and you've got to take the punches. And I've taken a lot of punches, I can tell you, a lot of punches.
It's a big psych game.
It's a mental game, like just about everything else in life. Everything else in life, it's 98% mental. But if you don't understand the game, right, you get sucked in, right, and that's the problem. So, I don't know if, Darren, do you want to comment on anything I've said, particularly in relation to precedent authorities and statutes? Do you want to make any comment on that? I'm going to draw on a couple of people just to make sure everyone's all right.
Yeah, I do agree with you that there are precedents that you can rely on and bring in from alternate cases that complement and make the point that you're trying to make that you can rely on. A lot of the time, or sometimes, they are ignored.
That's right.
So that's the problem, and that's what appears to be happening in the current jurisdiction that the courts are running under. And the jurisdiction that they're running under appears not to be in law.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. When you're not running under the law, there appears to be no rules, and they appear to be doing what they like.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with not running under some sort of constitutional restraint, let's call them.
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're saying, I agree, so we're kind of on the same page, and maybe at another level we could say that there's been a significant breakdown in the moral fibre and integrity of the country that we live in.
Just repeat what Darren said, because people can't hear it.
Oh, okay, you want me to repeat?
Well, just briefly. Yeah.
Look, Darren, I've just asked Darren a question, so for anyone on Zoom that hasn't met Darren, Darren's got a pretty, I noticed a couple of weeks ago, very good skill with respect to his understanding of statute in, I would suggest, a few different jurisdictions. And Darren's just making the point that, and Darren, just pick me up if I'm not expressing this in a way you're comfortable with, that it doesn't appear that in Australia at the moment that we're actually running under the proper, or not managing things in the proper way. And I think what he's referring to is that we live in a corporate legal system. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah.
That has no real basis in law as we would traditionally see it. And I think Darren's just flagging that issue, which I do agree with. So the game has changed, and for those of you that may have come to some of Daryl's or Darren's presentations, that is tied directly to this idea of whether we're a constitutional monarchy or a corporate / pseudo republic in Australia. And this is going on around the world, of course, as I'm sure you're aware. So, yeah, is that okay, mate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I'm trying to stay out of detail because I can get very detailed, and I don't want to do that because it just creates a lot of confusion. I'll just quickly touch on abuse of power was the other one, how to deal with it. I think I've sort of touched on that, but that was the third point. They are abusing power, no question. Right to the top, it's Parliament, the whole lot. I think that's pretty clear. I think everyone in here is pretty switched on. I don't need to say too much about that. The real question is, of course, how do you deal with it? And that was one of the things under my points. How do you deal with abuse of power? Now, I have to give some context here. If you want to go and play in the High Court or engage in the game with Parliament, you have to become which is a court, as Daryl says, and Darren, I'm sure, would agree. Parliament is a court. That's what it is. It's legal privileges, all sorts of really curly stuff going on there, and I don't know what the proportion is, but certainly in the United States, just about everybody in their Congress has a background in law, and certainly in Australia, I don't know, someone might like to comment on that, but there's a fairly heavy component of people that are in Parliament that actually have a legal training and a legal background. Has anyone got a rough idea, whether it's half of them or anyone ever asked that question?
It's at least half, but it wouldn't be more than 3/4.
Yeah, okay.
Because you've got a lot of people in there who are, like Andrew Wilkie's an ex-spook.
Yeah,
You've got ex-army officers and those types who've got legal training, but then you've got Jackie Lambie, who was a corporal in the army.
yeah.
So there's a lot of, and Malcolm Roberts, he's got no qualifications in anything. You've got
Yeah.
all those types as well, so
Yeah.
maybe 75%.
Okay.
But most of the cabinet are lawyers
Yeah,
and the people surrounding them.
right.
So, secretaries to departments and those types of lawyers as well.
Yeah.
They don't know the law, but they're lawyers.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks. Well, let's just call it 50%, which means we're still in better shape than the US, because it's absolutely shocking over there. And just a point on that, one of the matters I had to deal with another law firm, and this is the game that is played. I might just mention something else before that. This is what goes on with big corporates, and you're probably all aware of this. It's not just big corporates, and it's banks, there's other players as well, but I'll just focus on them. There's an opportunity to make $1 billion. The likely outcome of breaking the law is a fine of, say, 200 million. The rational decision is to break the law. Right? That is what goes on just about everywhere in banking, in large corporates. A lot of these guys are international. They look for jurisdictions, which are other countries where they can get away with murder, and if they do get caught, they might have to pay a bit of a fine. That goes on all the time. Here's another example, and I've had to deal with this myself. Big case. The argument became entirely about the legal meaning of the word "is". Right? Now you might think that a judge, and they possibly could, a judge hearing that case, and this was billions of dollars, big case, for us, well, that's just ridiculous, right? You could argue that the intent, and this is what the intention was. The intention was of the side that brought that into the argument before the judge was to wait until the other side run out of money. All right. Now, that's the game that's being played against me as well, or attempted to be played. And in my case, it was in yet another jurisdiction, this argument, and it was about the legal meaning of the word error. All right? And that's what the case... So I'm a bit of a newbie, right? I've had some background in stuff that just by whatever reason, chance, whatever, I just had a bit of an idea about esoteric stuff and legal fiction generally and stuff like that. So I was able to win that as well. But the real intent behind that was to keep me busy, which was clearly, while I was having to deal with these other things that were just horrific, right? And that was stated clearly, as I said, that can be stated outside of court. These guys know how to play the game, and they know, if I go into court and go, they said they're going to destroy me and they've been doing this, I don't waste my time with that. You just got to deal with it. And it does hurt, and it is magic, right? The games that are played are literally magic.
The art of spelling.
It's spelling. Correct, and that's with respect to written correspondence. So I've actually had that conversation with a lot of people for years. Have you ever thought about what spelling actually means? It's casting a spell.
It's the same as to appear.
So if you get you get a scary letter, which is what lawyers call them, right? And they're scum. Yeah, sorry, they just are.
It's not that good.
It's very easy to take advantage of people because most people are good people. That's the good. Humans are good by nature. Doesn't mean we don't have problems and everything. And this has been pissing me off for years in the industry that I worked in, which is obviously financial stuff and business. And I just watch them raping people in the most horrific ways on a mass scale by using, and it's literally stealing. Right? And the idea, again, as you probably all know, is if you are ignorant of the law, you're basically, if you want to get into maritime, you're a ship lost at sea, and maritime admiralty law, and you can be pirated. And the pirates is the legal services industry and the judiciary. They are the pirates, not you. Right? Because they do the arse about, they're trying to convince you that it's you that's got the problem, and I'm not saying they're all bad people, right? I'm trying to keep this balanced, right, at various levels. I'm going to try to do that. But I'm just making a point, right? I'm trying to be careful about not being seen to be like, these guys are all arseholes and that's it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's where that's coming from. Because there are people in the system that are well-intentioned and judges that are kind of trying to do the right thing.
Same as
There's
the
no
police.
question about that.
Same as
No
the
question.
police when you think about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Sorry?
same as the police when you think about it, they went
Yeah.
in with an
Yeah.
intention to be helping the community,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then find themselves in the corporate
Yeah.
world and
Yeah.
having to meet targets and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So when I write a letter, if I've got a good skills in the spelling department, I can get outcomes. Now, a lot of us are doing this stuff and we don't realise it. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah.
So just in the course of our daily things, if we do the right things and we're in business and we're trying to convince people that we've got something worth selling, and my position is always, and I think this is a fair comment of myself, I'm always doing things in business to try and help other people, right? That's what underpins everything I do, right? And I'm not, I can be pretty hard, I can be a hard bastard in business, but that's just with respect to negotiating stuff and stuff like that. But my basic nature is I look in terms of the activities I undertake to see something good happening, you know. But, you know, I know that's subjective, but on some level, but yeah, I like to see people, everybody, you know, we've all got that. If I could wave a magic wand and make everyone happy, I would, you know. It's pretty naive.
You wouldn't want to do
idea.
that in an esoteric
But
way,
it's,
though.
no.
Esoteric, along the way.
Yeah, that's
Mess
right.
with it.
So we've got to have a balance, right?
Yeah.
And we've got to also accept the positive and the negative for you across all that stuff. Or,
Yep.
Yeah, right. You know what I'm talking about. I'm sure most people are. So,
What you were saying about the corporates choosing
Yeah.
to break the law.
Yeah.
I've got a friend in New Jersey who likes to sue pharmaceutical companies.
yeah,
And when they bring out a new drug line, before it hits the market, they get an actuary in.
what, sorry?
An actuary.
Right.
They're a statistician.
Yeah, the actuaries. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they sit down and they look at it,
Mm.
and in the United States, same as here, you're not allowed to sell drugs off list.
Yeah.
Hang on,
So if
we're
the
going to
drug-
restart.
Okay. You're not allowed to sell drugs off list.
If it's for blood pressure, you
Yeah.
can't sell it for depression.
Right.
If you get sprung, you get done.
Yeah.
So what they do, they get the actuary in and they go, you're going to get fined $400 million.
Mm.
They factor that cost into the cost of each tablet.
Mm.
Oh,
And
Yeah,
that
that's-
money's held in trust,
Yeah.
and then when they eventually do get caught,
Yeah.
they don't pay, you pay,
Yeah, that's right.
if you consume their pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Which I
Yeah.
don't think you do you?
Sorry?
I don't think you consume their pharmaceuticals.
Well, you could probably, yeah, well, you're very intuitive then,
Yeah.
so I won't, I've never touched pharmaceuticals of any sort, pills, aspirins or whatever, I just seem to have intuitively known that, not to, since I was a kid and watching, and I don't know why that is, it just is, and I used to look at other people who every time something went wrong and they felt a slightly negative emotion, would go for aspirin. This is way back in my, you know, and it's advertised on the TV, isn't it?
I don't know.
You know, some people are just more susceptible to ideas.
Yeah.
There's a bit of magic comes through the TV as well. The people who are, and we're all affected by it, even if you think you aren't, your subconscious mind is being worked on all the time.
Yep.
And it's called sigil magic, that, and it's a very dangerous area to even look into. But it's real scary once you start to become aware of the consciousness of the people that are engaged in these practices. And they're doing it on a mass scale, and the TV is a very powerful instrument to do that. And I can't be hypnotised, I don't know why.
Yeah, same as me.
Yeah, a lot of people have tried.
Me too.
I can't be hypnotised, but most people can be hypnotised. Maybe because they're trusting, I don't know. I don't know why, I really don't know the answer to that. But those people are ones that are most easily influenced by advertising and TV.
Do you know who's behind advertising?
Flickr rates have increased massively over the last 30
Yeah.
years. All the stuff they get into is
Yep.
all designed specifically
Yep.
to, I don't want to use the word implant, but, plant
No,
stuff
that
in
is
there.
what they do.
And most people, even people sitting in this room, including me, right, probably don't realise the extent to which they are still running programs that you are not actually conscious of. Right? That's a
Yeah.
fact. And I notice them sometimes and I go, shit, where'd that impulse come from?
Yep.
And it's come from, and it's to do with consuming something.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And if you ask the question of yourself, why is that there?
Yeah.
Fuck, that one slipped through, excuse French.
We don't speak
scary.
French, it's fine.
It's scary. So,
There's a well-known documented fact that they did at the Coca-Cola in the summer, and the Coca-Cola sales went up through the roof at that point,
Yeah.
and it was subliminal. It was all subliminal.
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you know who came up with that? Edward Bernays.
Yeah, but
Sigmund Freud's nephew.
yeah,
Psychiatrists have written advertising.
look, I love to hate that guy. I'm just
Yeah.
going to let this go this way a bit at the moment, if everyone's comfortable with that. But Bernays, as the gentleman says, was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, who
Yeah.
I'm sure you've all heard of. I love to hate that guy because he's the father of sort of emotioneering and with respect to marketing, in my opinion. However, he's the guy that actually, what he actually did, or one of the things he's renowned for, is getting women smoking. Right? And the way he did that was to, sort of have this advertising campaign about cigarettes being freedom sticks. Has anyone heard about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've got to look at the context of that. And this is what you've got to do to try not to judge people, which I make a big effort to do, but fail quite regularly. But the context at the time was that women were second-class citizens. Would people agree? They were treated as such.
Chattels.
Didn't have even a vote, I think, at that stage. Where had all this shit on the TV, all those old ads and everything. They're scary, right? Which people watch and then they start behaving that way. I think half the population in the US was on Valium, I think, the female population. And that was just an attitude at the time, and he did that specifically for the purpose of trying to double the sales of cigarette companies. Is that a fair summation? Now, at that time, you have to always look at the cultural context. That's what I do. What was the culture at that particular time that led to these sort of behaviours? And because I tend to go, you sinner, bastard, that'll be a little voice that comes up in there, I hate your guts, right? If I think about the nasal, and I go, no, don't do that. You have to look at the context. And Carl Jung's, I don't know if anyone's read Carl Jung. I like him, right? He hasn't reinvented anything that hasn't been known for a very long time, but he had a lot of guts in his day to come out with the sort of stuff that he came out with, a gutsy bloke. And he's a guy that really came up with the idea of synchronicity, which I'm sure you guys... Does everyone know what that is?
Oh yeah.
Do you experience it?
All the time.
So you're conscious of it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually going on. It's actually going on. Hey?
He experienced it with me Monday.
Yeah. So we could sit here and define what that is. I know we're getting into a little bit of esoteric stuff. That's how my world works. It's worked that way for a long time. Seeing as there's a couple of guys in the room that know what I'm talking about, I manifest what I need.
Indeed.
And it just enters into my world. That's part of my... this is going to sound like real crazy stuff to some of the younger people.
No, I can totally
Yet
relate to what
aware
you're
of
saying.
this stuff, right?
We had a discussion about this very topic.
Yeah, well, my whole world, I manifest people that I need, exactly what I need. I hold the intention, I have a question. I've done this since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I discovered this when I was a kid. And I need the answer to something that I'm either struggling with at an emotional, personal level, or with respect to, say, taking on a very large group of very experienced legal firms, right? And these people just turn up in my world.
Can I just quickly say, while you're saying that, and I would encourage people to actually look at this. There's a misleading series of videos on YouTube called "It's Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich,"
Yeah,
And it's actually, it's very misleading because it's actually grow rich in yourself.
yeah,
But there's one part that's particular was an interest to me, and I actually do what you've just described, and it's through Napoleon Hill's mastermind principle, where you actually sit and possibly just relax and meditate, and the people that you want to talk to, alive or dead, they're all energy.
yeah,
Thoughts are outside their heads, not in our heads.
yeah.
I know that sounds crazy, but that's just
Well, it's not the external world, as
Yes,
George will
it's
tell
a-
you, is an
well,
illusion.
like
It's
I'm
an
a
illusion.
pilot, we navigate by the ether, it's no empty space, you know.
Yeah,
But if you surround yourself with the people that you want
yeah.
and just wait, just meditate and wait,
Mm.
and then you start actually having conversations.
Yeah, right.
It is
yeah,
the strangest thing ever.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because, you know,
It's
it's
the
all
same,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, but with respect to this stuff too, again, I'm just going to remind people that if you're playing with the guys at the Pawnee, and they know the game as
Oh
well.
yes,
Right, and that's where the magic comes in, and actually playing this game at that level is amazing. And I've rolled these guys in ways that they just didn't see coming, not because I'm
no,
some brilliant dude.
no,
This is barristers, some of the top barristers, because they just fucked themselves up, because
Yeah.
I was just holding centre.
yes,
Does that make any sense?
yes.
Doesn't mean I don't get
No.
wobbly and I
No, no.
make big mistakes, you know. It's like that old analogy, the tennis ball, you know that one?
Yeah,
You know, they hit it over and you've
Yeah.
got to decide whether you're going to hit it back or not. Well, most of them I don't hit back. We've had that discussion because there's no point. But there was a couple that, you know, I could see the ball coming over and it had, you know, 300 grand on it. You know, that's like, that's going to hurt, and I know it's money, right? It's only money. But, you know, I thought, shit, I better hit that one. Go for it. Oh, shit, I missed. You know? They're mistakes, you know. I've made those mistakes, and once you made them, I let it go. And you can pick it up later, and, you know, that's the part of the game too. Well, look, that's gone now. Don't cry over spilled milk. These are all mental tricks. Yeah, whatever. It's just money. That's the grateful thing too.
Yeah.
Just being grateful. Don't worry about it. And I'll see about that 300 later, you know. You know, when I do my other things, you know. But I was doing a juggling act. I was absolutely overwhelmed. You know, I'm going to, you know, share the human element of my journey with this. There's been moments where I've had my head in my hands and I was like, this is too much.
yeah.
And then you just go dig, you know. Because I got a lot of other people to look after. I had staff. I've got other things like everyone else in my world, people that need my support. That I already have, you know, all that's got to be done as well as you got these arseholes, and you can get to a point where you're really overwhelmed, and I'm sure, I reckon Nick's hit that point a few times. With that, do you mind me asking you that question, Nick?
You can ask
You've
me.
taken on a fair bit, mate. You know,
Yeah. So,
we all hit it.
last week we beat Victoria Police at court.
Yeah,
So with the help of Paulie, with all the processes of court and paperwork and everything, which I'm not familiar with, starting to get familiar with it now. You know, and I carried myself, you know, at court, you know, just absolutely buried and got the cars back without paying any fees. Next step is to claim compensation for, you know, all the dramas that caused, amongst other things from others too.
So it would be fair to say that you actually had a good judge,
She was a very good magistrate. Yeah.
magistrate. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she behaved as a woman, not as a magistrate.
Yeah,
I
thank
could
you.
tell that she was
So this is a bit of
using
perception.
her common sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of perception in the dialogue there. I would see it a little bit differently, but that's fine. You know, we're all seeing that he's gone from being in a war, right, with people taking cars and stuff, empowered by statute. You know, Victoria Police. I don't even know what the laws are. Are they home laws or something? What are they manipulating?
No, it's just
Yeah.
unlicensed, unregistered nonsense.
Yeah, right. So, and then he's met a judge with empathy. Would that be a fair comment? Says carries with empathy.
Yeah, well, she conducted herself that way with everyone, and you know,
Yeah.
she's that sort of character. She's definitely got common sense. And
So you come across these people, and she's just gone, yeah, bugger all those statutes and everything that's happened, and you know, here we go, here's your stuff back, right?
yeah.
That's how it appears on the surface. There was something else going on.
Yeah,
below.
those court costs, those
Yeah.
police defendants kept
Yeah.
standing up, going, but, what
Yeah.
about that? He should pay the fees. And
Yeah.
like, they were trying to defend the pound, you know,
Of course
which
they
was
were.
owned by the police.
Yeah, that's their job.
And she
Yeah.
didn't give them nothing, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
She
isn't
supposed
that
to pay me
amazing?
everything on a silver platter, but so she should. She's my servant because she's a good servant. Well, yes, we created these positions
Anyway.
to serve us.
Oh, that's great. Anyway, look, that's really good to share, but it shows that, so the police with their mentality and their understanding, you know, police are involved in this and they've got a problem. The cops hate judges, right? Their view generally is, and this is why they break the law and they try and find ways around things, is that look at all these people getting away with stuff, right? So in your situation, and this is all about the subjectivity, in that situation you've just come across, for reasons that I believe I know, a really cool magistrate.
Yeah, I didn't even claim hardship,
yeah,
not at all.
Yeah.
I just went there to say it's not abandoned.
Yeah, so and I'd argue there was a shift in you which I saw before that occurred, right? And it's the inner shift that then creates a different outcomes in the external world. And we think things are by coincidence, is something George talks about a lot, and I agree with her. Right? There's no such thing. Doesn't exist.
No.
And that's the outcome you've got. And the police are upset because what they see, and I know I've met a lot of police, and I have police that senior police that I actually talk to about this stuff, that are in my circle. They're not like that, the senior guys. They know that the people down the bottom are idiots. That's what they'll tell you privately. They're just absolute idiots. But those police that are on the ground are usually they're aggrieved. They've got something in their world. Not all of them are like this again, but they think they are so upset all the time because they see people getting away with stuff, right? So that's just their perspective. So what happened? You know, they're basically bitching and whinging about the fact that this magistrate's just gone, go away.
And she was disgusted with it too. I could see it in her face, like the way they're trying to convince her that I should pay. But you know, I reckon by following just that one form, the non-abandonment form, and just writing on there 3 times, or 2 forms, one for each car. 3 times I wrote, I require immediate restoration of property, and you know, and I've just written things in a certain way. And, you know, I've autographed it as a leading man. I haven't done any joint signatures or anything like that. You know, all that sort of business, and I've effectively nullified the document, in my opinion.
Anyway, well, it's a really good outcome, and I'm glad that's happened. So, I can't see the clock. What's the time now? Is it 20 to 29?
Been talking for 50 minutes.
Okay, well, I want to cut to the chase on this. Is everyone happy with what we've covered? I know it's kind of different.
It's fantastic.
You cool with it? Yeah. The last thing was settlement agreements, and I've sort of touched on this a little bit, but I just want to try and stay true to the 3 points that I made. I've just settled my last one on the 12th of November last year with a major law firm. I was going to bring a copy of that in, but I haven't, because this sort of happened a bit quicker than I was planning. Because they don't have any information in it. That's the whole point. And I've made this point in just prior discussions with a few people, that the whole idea of private type settlements, and this is to people who are looking out in the world at the moment about issues like, what do you call it, all the child trafficking and sexual abuse. There's people out there talking about our Attorney General Christian Porter being a pedophile or part of a pedophile ring. I make no comment on that because legally it's hearsay. As you would be well aware, that's come from someone else, and no matter how credible, not someone from this group, but no matter how credible that person might be, or how, credible I think they are, I kind of act a bit like a judge when I'm dealing with these matters. That's hearsay. I just push it out of my mind. The only thing that I can act on is things that I know about that have come through a strange circumstance, a job that I didn't want, right, because it got dropped in my lap. I can only deal with that directly. So if it's true though, for example, that this is going on a global level, involves, I'm not saying what I think, but politicians all over the world and all the rest of it. What I've been arguing is that these matters will be settled, but most of it won't be public at all. That's how it's done. So we have things called non-publication orders in the courts, and that's been a factor in some of my stuff, where it'll go to the Chief Justice, they'll defer to the Chief Justice and they can decide whether certain matters and things will be published, which means they will then be publicly available, right? So if they don't, and this is, something else just popped in my head. This is what the public interest is about. Has anyone heard that expression? The public, it's not in the public interest.